2020, a team of geneticists and archaeologists at Trinity College, Dublin, published a study in the journal Nature. The team was led by Dr. Lara Cassidy and Professor Daniel Bradley, two of the most respected DNA researchers in Europe. They had extracted DNA from the bones of a man buried deep inside Newgrange. What they found was extraordinary. Dr. Cassidy explained it simply. She said, "We all inherit two copies of the genome, one from our mother, one from our father. This individual's copies were extremely similar. That is a clear sign of close inbreeding. His parents were first-degree relatives." First-degree relatives. That means a brother and a sister, or a parent and a child. This was not an accident. This was not a tragedy. This was deliberate. Professor Daniel Bradley, professor of population genetics at Trinity College, told the Irish Times that the way this man was buried, at the very center of the most important monument in the country, made it almost certain he was royalty, the highest possible royalty. Dr. Cassidy said he was, in her words, among a ruling social elite akin to the similarly inbred Inca god kings and Egyptian pharaohs, an Irish pharaoh, buried in a stone monument that was already more sophisticated than anything in Egypt at the time. But here is the question nobody asked when this story went viral. What exactly did this man believe? What god did he serve? What religion demanded that his bloodline be kept this pure? Because it was not Christianity. It was not Celtic paganism. It was something older, something that has no name anymore. And the story of what that religion was and why it disappeared is one of the most extraordinary stories in human history. To understand it, we need to go back even further. Around 3200 BC, over 5,000 years ago, a group of people built Newgrange. They had no metal tools, no written language, no wheel. And yet, they built a structure made of around 200,000 tons of stone that is so perfectly aligned to the sky that on exactly one morning every year, the morning of the winter solstice, the shortest day, something remarkable happens. A narrow beam of sunlight enters through a small window above the entrance passage. That beam of light travels 19 meters down a stone corridor in the dark, and it illuminates the burial chamber at the very back. Professor M.J. O'Kelly, the archaeologist who rediscovered this phenomenon on December 21st, 1969, recorded it with awe. He documented that at exactly 8:54 a.m., the light entered. It lasted 17 minutes, filling the chamber, lighting the carved stone walls, reaching the bones of the dead. Then it faded, and the chamber went dark again for another year. This was not an accident of architecture. Researcher J. Patrick confirmed in a 1974 paper published in the journal Nature that this solar alignment was intentional. It was built this way from the very beginning. Every stone, every angle, every measurement was calculated to make this happen. But why? Because for these people, the winter solstice was the most dangerous moment of the year. The sun was at its weakest. It could die. It might not return. And the ritual at Newgrange was a prayer built in stone. Let the sun be reborn. Let the dead intercede. Let the world continue. The man buried in that chamber, the god king, kept pure through ritual incest, was the one holding the bargain together. His divine bloodline was the deal between the living and the sun. That was the religion, not a named god, not a scripture, not a church, a stone, a beam of light, a corpse positioned for resurrection. And here is the detail that stops you cold. These people did not come from Ireland originally. Their DNA traces all the way back to Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Around 6000 BC, a farming revolution began in Anatolia. These early farmers slowly spread across Europe, through Greece, up through the Balkans, along the Atlantic coast, carrying their seeds, their cattle, and their cosmology with them. So Professor Ron Pinhasi, archaeologist at the University of Vienna in Austria, whose work contributed to the European Neolithic migration studies, has noted that these Anatolian farmers carried not just agriculture, but a complete system of belief tied to solar cycles and the death and rebirth of the sun. Everywhere they went across Europe, they built passage tombs aligned to solar events. By the time they reached Ireland around 4000 BC, building Newgrange wasn't new. It was a religious obligation they had been fulfilling for generations across an entire continent. But here is something that should stop you completely. When these Anatolian farmers arrived in Ireland, the island was not empty. Ireland already had people. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers had been living on this island for nearly 4,000 years before the farmers arrived. The DNA tells us something remarkable about these original Irish people. They had dark skin and blue eyes. Their genetic profile was unlike almost any population found anywhere else in the world. They had their own language, their own way of living. Almost certainly, their own beliefs about death, about the sky, about what happens after we die. And then the farmers arrived. And within just a few generations, these original Irish people essentially vanished from the genetic record. Only two individuals, show significant traces of this original Mesolithic Irish DNA at a late date. They were found at a tomb called Park Nabinia in County Clare. Dr. Lara Cassidy described these two individuals as a kind of genetic ghost, survivors of a population that was officially, statistically, gone. Two people was the last biological witnesses to Ireland's very first faith. Whatever the hunter-gatherers of Ireland believed, what they called the night, what they said over their dead, what they thought the stars meant, it died with them, unrecorded, unnamed. Somewhere around 3,500 BC, not with a war, not with a massacre, simply by being outnumbered. But the story does not stop there, because around 2,500 BC, something even more dramatic happened. A new group of people arrived in Ireland. They came from the Eurasian steppe, the vast grasslands of what is now Russia and Ukraine. They are called the Bell Beaker people, and what they did to the genetic landscape of Ireland is almost without parallel in European prehistory. Within just a few centuries, approximately 90% of Ireland's Neolithic gene pool was replaced. Let that land for a moment. And the people who built Newgrange, the people who maintained the solar god king dynasty, the people who engineered the most precise astronomical monument in Bronze Age Europe, they were almost completely replaced, demographically overwhelmed. A 2016 study published in the journal PNAS, led by Professor Daniel Bradley at Trinity College, Dublin, confirmed this through whole genome sequencing of Bronze Age Irish remains. The study found that steppe-related ancestry entered Ireland with what the researchers called startling rapidity, reshaping the population, the language, and the religion simultaneously. And the genetic marker left behind by those Bronze Age steppe migrants, a Y chromosome marker called R1b-M269, is the dominant marker in the DNA of Irish men alive today. This means the average Irish man right now is genetically far closer to a Bronze Age warrior from the Russian steppe than to the man buried inside Newgrange. The man whose religion built the most sacred site in all of Ireland, he is genetically more foreign to the modern Irish than the people who replaced him. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. Newgrange was never destroyed. The Bell Beaker people did not tear it down. No warlord burned it. No conqueror buried it. It stood. And every new civilization that arrived in Ireland was pulled toward it, compelled to explain it, forced to incorporate it into their own worldview. When the Celts arrived in Ireland around 500 to 300 BC, they brought a fully formed pantheon of gods, the Dagda, Lu, the Morrigan. These were Indo-European sky gods, the same type found in Celtic cultures across all of Europe. But something happened to those gods on Irish soil that happened nowhere else in the Celtic world. In every other Celtic culture, in Gaul, in Britain, in Iberia, the supreme deity was associated with the sky, with storms and thunder. In Ireland alone, the Dagda, the All-Father, the supreme deity, was associated not with the sky, but with the sun. Professor Proincius MacKenna, Celtic Studies scholar at University College Dublin, documented this theological anomaly carefully. He concluded that the Dagda's solar identity in Ireland was almost certainly the result of the Celts absorbing and being changed by a sun worship tradition that was already ancient when they arrived, rooted in the Neolithic religion of Newgrange. The incoming Celts didn't create Ireland's solar theology. They inherited it, and they moved their gods inside the old monuments. The Neolithic passage tombs, Newgrange, Noath, Douth, were renamed by the Celts as Side, fairy mounds. The supernatural divine race of Irish mythology, the Tuatha De Danann, were installed inside them. The old sacred geography became the home of the new gods. The Celts didn't erase the old religion. They renovated it. And the four great seasonal festivals that Ireland is still famous for, Samhain, Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lugnasad, scholars have traced their structural roots to the pre-Celtic Neolithic agricultural and solar calendar. The Irish weren't celebrating Celtic holidays. They were, without knowing it, maintaining a religious calendar that was 3,000 years older than the Celts who named it. Then came Christianity. And the story of what the church did in Ireland, when you see it clearly, is one of the most calculated moves in religious history. The famous story of St. Patrick driving the snakes from Ireland is, of course, a metaphor. But a metaphor for what? The serpent was a pre-Christian symbol of the earth, the underworld, the cycle of death and renewal, the very theology that Newgrange was built around. Patrick wasn't driving out animals. He was attempting to drive out nearly 5,000 years of accumulated sacred memory. Professor Daithí O'Hagan, folklorist at University College Dublin, documented how early Irish missionaries faced a challenge they encountered nowhere else in Europe. The sacred geography of Ireland was so deeply layered that Christianizing the Irish people meant Christianizing Neolithic space that had been holy for over 3,000 years before the Celts even arrived. You cannot simply tell people to stop finding a place sacred. So the church used a different strategy. They built on top of the old sites. Churches were placed directly on pre-Christian ritual mounds. The sacred flame of the goddess Brigid at Kildare, which had burned continuously, tended exclusively by women in a Neolithic-rooted tradition, was rededicated to Saint Brigid. The flame kept burning. Only the name changed. The feast days were absorbed date by date into the Christian calendar. Samhain became All Souls' Day. Imbolc became the Feast of Saint Brigid. The Bealtaine fires became Easter fires. The church did not replace the old calendar. It wore it like a costume. And there is a site in County Armagh called Navan Fort, one of the most important pre-Christian ritual locations in all of Ireland, where archaeologists found something they have never fully explained, a massive circular wooden structure that had been deliberately burned and buried under a mound of stones around 95 BC. Someone burned it. Someone buried it. Someone needed whatever was inside it to stay hidden. We still do not know who ordered this, or why. But here is what the ground itself reveals. Across Christian-era Ireland, in burial sites dated hundreds of years after the official conversion to Christianity, archaeologists found bodies buried face down. This is not a Christian burial practice. It is not Celtic. It is a Neolithic practice, connected to the belief that the dead must be correctly returned to the earth, to the night realm, to the cycle of burial and renewal that Newgrange was built to serve. Dr. Katrina Gibson, archaeologist specializing in early medieval Irish burial practices, documented in multiple excavation reports that pre-Christian mortuary behaviors, specific body orientations, grave goods, burial proximity to Neolithic sacred sites, continued well into the 9th and 10th centuries AD in Ireland, centuries after the official conversion. The body in the ground was still following the old instructions. Imagine a farmer in County Clare in 740 AD. He attends Mass every Sunday. He is genuinely Christian, but when he buries his mother, when he positions her body with deliberate care, facing the direction his grandmother taught him, and her grandmother taught her, in an unbroken chain of gesture stretching back to a woman who understood exactly what that direction meant, in a religion that had no name anymore. He does not know the theology, but his hands remember. Ireland has over 3,000 holy wells, more than any other country in Europe. Most were originally Neolithic water cult sites. The Celts made them goddess shrines. The Christians made them saints' wells. People today still tie strips of cloth, called cluties, to the thorn trees growing beside them, with no conscious awareness that they are performing a ritual that predates Christianity by 4,000 years. Professor Geraldine Stout, archaeologist at the Discovery Program in Ireland, whose decades of fieldwork mapped over 40 megalithic monuments in the Boyne Valley alone, noted that the sacred geography of this landscape was so deeply embedded that every later civilization was, in her words, incapable of desacralizing it, only capable of reinterpreting it. Before we go to the final reveal, I want to ask you something directly. My last video was called The Lost Religion of Ireland. It wasn't Christianity. If you watched it, what moment hit you hardest? Drop the timestamp in the comments below. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's linked in the description, because what I'm about to tell you connects directly to it. Now, the modern Irish genome. When scientists laid the ancient DNA from Newgrange against the genome of modern Irish people, the result was a number that reframes everything. From the Neolithic people who built Newgrange, the Solar God King dynasty, the engineers of that 17-minute beam of light, their DNA makes up only a small fraction of the modern Irish genome. Professor David Reich, geneticist at Harvard University in the United States, whose lab has produced some of the most comprehensive ancient DNA population studies ever conducted, confirmed in his work that the Bell-Beaker migration into Britain and Ireland was among the most dramatic and rapid genetic replacements documented anywhere in the ancient world. 3 waves of people entered Ireland: the original Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, Ireland's first inhabitants; then the Neolithic Anatolian farmers, builders of Newgrange; then the Bronze Age Bell-Beaker steppe migrants, ancestors of most modern Irish people. Each wave replaced the genetic signature of the previous one. This means the 70 million people of Irish descent worldwide, in Boston, Sydney, Buenos Aires, Lagos, are primarily the biological descendants of Bronze Age steppe migrants, not the builders of Newgrange. The Irish identity that survived the famine, that survived 800 years of colonization, that survived everything thrown at it, is carried largely by the descendants of people who arrived nearly 2,000 years after Newgrange was already ancient. And yet, the rituals, the solar alignment, the holy wells, the burial directions, the seasonal festivals, all of it survived 3 population replacements and 2 religious conquests. Which tells us something extraordinary. This religion was never stored in a bloodline. It was stored in the land. And now, the final piece. Buried in the data of Dr. Lara Cassidy's 2020 Nature study, in a section that most headlines completely ignored, is an anomaly. 2 individuals from Parknabinia, County Clare, show Mesolithic ancestry levels that should not exist at their date in the archaeological record, as if a tiny pocket of Ireland's original hunter-gatherer population had survived, isolated, invisible to history, for centuries beyond the official replacement. Dr. Cassidy described them as what geneticists call a ghost population. People who existed, who had children, who passed something forward, but who left no name, no monument, no mythology. They are in the data and nowhere else. If those Mesolithic descendants survived long enough to pass their DNA into later Neolithic communities, and from there into Bronze Age Ireland, and then into Celtic Ireland, and then into Christian Ireland, then somewhere on this island today, there is a living person carrying an unbroken biological thread back to Ireland's very first human beings, to the people who watched the Neolithic farmers arrive, to the ones who had no word for God because their faith was older than language. Science can find that person. It can sequence their DNA. It can map the haplogroup and trace the thread all the way back. What science cannot do, and this is the part that stops researchers mid-sentence, is tell them what their oldest ancestor believed, what they called the light that returned every winter, what they whispered over their dead before any religion had a name on this island. That knowledge is gone. It cannot be sequenced. 3 population replacements, 2 religious conquests, 5,000 years of overwriting, and something survived, not because it was protected, not because anyone chose to preserve it, because it was needed, because humans are not capable of fully desacralizing a place that was already sacred when they arrived. Right now, somewhere in Ireland, a woman is tying a strip of cloth to a thorn tree beside dark water. She does not know she is 5,000 years old in that moment, and the question this leaves open, the one science has not yet answered, the one history has never fully faced, is not what Ireland believed. It is what it means that after everything, it never completely stopped. That question, we will carry into the next episode. If you made it this far, you already know you need to be there. Subscribe, and we will go somewhere even older.